conducted a LinkedIn survey asking people when was the last time their company had surveyed them to request feedback on hiring processes and interview strategies. 70% responded never. This means that at least 2/3 of companies are not doing any sort of an audit on where things stand from a hiring perspective, because surveying current employees would absolutely be a mandatory part of this audit process. And with no formal audit in place, your organization will struggle in the following ways. You'll struggle to implement a clear and comprehensive hiring plan, understand the infrastructure, understand the systems needed to accommodate for growth, plan the budget and timeline needed to be successful, discern how to attract and retain talent, identify gaps in job descriptions and scorecards, uncover interview best practices and opportunities for training, remove bias and comply with legal requirements, and establish the documentation that will lead to more accountability and continuous improvement. Whew. That is a lot of items, and this is just scraping the surface. By auditing your hiring processes and interview strategies, you will create better productivity and get better results. You're going to increase the morale and happiness of your employees, and your company will make more money. Let's dive into it. We're going to dive into how to conduct an effective audit. And if you have not watched the roadmap or data videos, I pinned cards up above to watch those videos first. Let's start with data. In our second video in this series, we uncovered the true cost of a bad hire, focusing in on both direct and indirect costs. Other data you might want to consider reviewing before conducting an audit are items like source of hire, time to hire, quality to hire, DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion hires. You should be able to easily request this data from your talent acquisition team. And if they're not able to produce this data within a few minutes, your organization likely has some major process gaps. Either way, data is going to help you in two specific ways. First, it will help you uncover how bad things truly are, and second, it will provide you with the information needed to influence others on the importance of the audit. And this is a great segue into the second critical audit item: leadership buy-in and communication. 4 critical steps are required early on. Step 1, the leader, the CEO, the president, the owner, the co-founder, whoever it is, needs to be committed to a yearly audit and to be able to influence the other critical stakeholders on the importance of an audit. Because if your organization has never conducted an audit before, it will take time, effort, and commitment, and require everyone in the organization, from leadership to hiring managers to individual contributors, to adjust their perspective on what is required to make the organization great from a hiring perspective. Step 2. After the leadership has had a formal meeting, a deadline should be set to communicate to all employees verbally in one-to-ones or a team meeting that this hiring audit will be taking place. Step 3, after the information has been communicated verbally, a more formal communication should be emailed to the entire organization, communicating the importance of the audit and what to look out for in the coming weeks with a specific plan. Step 4, during these communications, managers at every level should start determining and asking employees if they'd like to play a role in this audit process, if they're interested in improving this part of the business, because leaning into employees and getting their buy-in and having them share how to better the organization will be a huge win for the company. So, we've taken these couple of initial steps. Now, a first very basic step is just determining the scope. And so in order to determine the scope, the leadership team and talent acquisition will need to go right back to the data and start inputting the data into some form of project management tool, spreadsheet, etc. And determining at a very high level, well, what are the existing processes, systems, and resources, including but not limited to looking at things like headcount planning. Where do things stand with the ATS, the current applicant tracking system, from an interviewing perspective, looking at things like job descriptions, job scorecards, interview panels, interview questions, interview feedback, hiring decision-making, recruiter process, candidate experience, compensation, onboarding, online branding, etc. It's a lot, but creating some basic scope and some basic areas is going to be really helpful. And when looking at these items, be thinking about just some general categories like quality is a big one, usability is a good one, compliance is going to be really important. What are the costs associated with this item? This will give the organization a baseline on where things stand. Next is feedback. This is one of my favorite areas. Now that the baseline's been created, it's time to get additional input from internal to potentially external stakeholders as well in the form of a survey. And completing this survey absolutely needs to be mandatory for all employees. And this will be communicated by leadership in both those one-to-ones and in that email. And the timeline to complete this survey should be very aggressive. And secondly, feedback from external stakeholders would be ideal. Mostly those that went through the application, referral, or interview process and did not get hired. And focus on people who recently went through the process in the last quarter to 6 months ideally, and adding in a small budget for something like an Amazon gift card, for example, will increase the results of these surveys. Now, a candidate experience survey should be given to every candidate that interviews with your company, but if your organization does not already have this process in place, this is just another way to collect data. Some people who have applied and never made it to the interview process, you're going to want to survey them anyway. I'm going to chat a lot about candidate experience on this channel, so it's something we'll double down on later. The next step, we're going to do a SWOT analysis. Now that the leadership team and talent acquisition have identified the initial scope, it's time to start diving in. What are the hiring and processes and interview strategies that are working well? What are some small incremental changes that could be made in these areas? What hiring processes and interview strategies aren't working well and need to be changed immediately? What are the biggest holes and what needs to be prioritized first? What opportunities could the organization leverage to improve things? And what are the threats to your company if no changes are implemented? Any threats need to be addressed immediately and should be given the highest priority. Then we move on to planning. Finally, we can start planning. Based on the SWOT analysis and looking at the documented recommendations, your organization can start to categorize and look at what could be implemented quickly with low impact to resources and budget, and what will have a high impact but require additional resources and budget. Then prioritize and create a clearly defined timeline or timelines to get the most critical challenge areas in this audit completed. And if this is your first time doing an audit, it's likely going to need to be done in stages, and it may take multiple quarters to get all the work completed. And while it depends on your organization, 2 critical areas that the audit should really be doubling down on are some attention to your overall system, specifically your applicant tracking system, and interview training, which I will cover in future videos. Lastly, there should be a plan to do a yearly audit. This needs to happen once a year. And while the initial audit is going to be a lot of work, future years will be much easier. The last 2 items I want to discuss are accountability and continuous improvement. These are 2 topics that I will talk about extensively on this YouTube channel. So it starts with accountability. There needs to be accountability built into this process because employees will find ways to prioritize work that is more important. But nothing is more important than hiring the right people, and all this audit work will go to waste if your organization does not have a clear and continuous improvement plan in place. Create very simple systems and ways for employees to continually leave feedback on areas of the hiring process that need improvement, and create a priority system so that the most important items can be completed on a quarterly basis. I know audits can feel overwhelming. The benefits will have a massive impact. Next, we move on and take the learnings from the audit and apply them to our applicant tracking system.